The wind howled through the frozen trees outside. Thick snow covered the ground like a white blanket, and inside the small metal cabin, a single lantern flickered weakly. Ray sat near the heater, sipping recycled coffee from a dented metal cup. His rifle leaning against the wall beside him. He hadn't seen anyone in 2 weeks. This far out in the wastelands, no one came without a reason, and those who did usually brought trouble. That's why the knock at the door froze his blood. Not loud, not hurried, just a soft, slow knock. Knock, knock. Ray didn't move for a moment. His hand slowly reached for the rifle. He stood up quietly and stepped toward the door, his boots making soft crunching sounds on the floor. Another knock came, this one even softer. Like the person on the other side was scared to be heard, Ray pulled open the viewing hatch. What he saw made his breath catch. A woman stood outside, her skin pale blue, covered in frost. Her long hair stuck to her face with ice. In her arms, she held a small bundle of child, even smaller than he expected. The girl's feet were purple. From the cold, her eyes half closed. The woman met Ray's eyes through the slit in the door. Her voice was weak, almost lost in the wind. "Please, just feed my daughter," she whispered. "I'll stay quiet, I'll cook. I'll stay in your bed, just don't turn us away." Ray blinked. Unsure if he heard her right, he opened the door slowly, pointing the rifle down but not lowering it. The cold rushed in like a beast, biting his skin instantly. The woman stumbled forward but didn't fall. She held the child tighter, as if she was carrying the last light in the world. "Inside," Ray said, moving aside. She didn't wait. She stepped in quickly, her knees shaking. Her eyes scanned the room like she expected someone to jump out at her. Ray shut the door and bolted it, then looked at her again. She hadn't lied. The girl was in terrible shape. Her lips blue, her hands cold as ice. Ray didn't ask questions yet. He dropped 2 dry logs into the heater, making the fire blaze stronger, then grabbed a clean blanket and wrapped the child in it. "Soup," he muttered. Moving to his storage shelf, he opened a can of protein stew and poured it into a pot. The smell filled the room, quickly, thick, salty, and hot. The woman sat in the corner, still holding the child close, her eyes never leaving the door. When the soup was ready, Ray gave it to the child first. She sipped it, then drank faster, her small hands shaking. Ray turned to the woman, but she pushed the bowl away gently. "Give it to her," she said, her voice dry like sand. "She needs more." Ray stared at her a moment, then sat down across the room. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kari," she whispered. "Her name is Luma." He looked at the child, who was already asleep in her arms. "You said something." At the door, Ray said, "Why?" he asked. "Why offer yourself like that?" Kari looked down, her hands trembling because I knew no one else would help. Ray waited, but she didn't say more. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat near the heater with his rifle ready, eyes half open, watching them. Something didn't sit right. No one just walks into the wasteland during a storm unless they're desperate or running, and Kari looked like both just before dawn. Ray noticed something ate a thin metal collar on her neck, cracked, half broken, with burn marks around the edges. He didn't ask about it yet. Instead, he checked the fire, made more soup, and prepared for a day that already felt like trouble was coming. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering every track, but deep down, Ray knew something had followed them, and it wasn't the cold. Ray didn't ask questions that morning. Not yet. He just watched and listened. Kari moved slowly around the cabin, careful not to touch anything she didn't need to. She cleaned the dishes from last night with melted snow water, then quietly folded the blanket the child had used. Her hands moved like she'd done this 1,000 times before, but her eyes never relaxed. Luma slept longer than expected, her small body still recovering. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked at Ray with fear. But also something else, curiosity. She didn't cry or hide. She just clung to Kari's leg and kept glancing up at the strange human in the worn coat with the scar over his eyebrow. Ray handed Kari a warm cup of broth. "You need to eat," he said. She took it this time, but only after Luma nodded softly, like she was giving her mother permission. Outside, the storm had calmed, but the sky stayed gray, and the wind still whispered across the frozen metal of the roof. Ray checked the motion sensors along the ridge. Nothing had triggered them, but he didn't feel safe, not yet. "You didn't come from the east," Ray said while repairing a cracked panel near the heater. "No one crosses that valley alive." Kari didn't look at him. "We didn't cross it," she replied quietly. "We fell through it." Ray stopped moving. Her words didn't make sense, not at first. Then he realized what she meant, some kind of underground route, maybe an old maintenance tunnel. Maybe a forgotten mining line. Either way, it was risky. Almost suicidal. Luma was born in chains, Kari added, her voice flat but heavy. "She's never seen the stars before." Ray sat back, wiping grease from his hands. "You were in a camp." She nodded slowly, then reached behind her neck and turned the broken collar slightly, revealing the faint marking Koro property code. Industrial slave tag, burned into the edge. Ray had heard of the Koro Syndicate. They operated far from the eyes of the central systems, trafficking people, stealing rare DNA, building hidden colonies filled with prisoners. It wasn't legal, but no one came this deep to stop them. Kari didn't speak again for hours. She just stayed close to her daughter. Watching her breathe, brushing her hair gently, Ray fixed the solar battery cables, sharpened his knife, restocked the firewood, all while pretending not to feel the tension in the room that night. Just after he turned off the main lantern, he heard something strange, Kari whispering in a language he didn't understand. Softly, like a prayer, like she was speaking to ghosts. He leaned against the wall, eyes open in the dark, and heard her finish with one word he did know. Human. Ray didn't sleep again. Not fully. In his gut, he knew it wasn't over. No. One escapes the Kuru and stays free forever. And Kari. She wasn't just afraid. She was preparing for what? Ray still didn't know, but he could feel it coming. Closer with each breath, like frost creeping under the door. Silent but deadly. And outside in the frozen distance, someone else had started walking. Ray found the collar the next morning when Kari stepped outside to pour melted snow into the heating tank. The girl was asleep, wrapped tight in 2 blankets now. Ray had noticed the shine before, but never saw it this clearly. Thin metal, cracked on one side, but not broken enough to be useless. He carefully lifted it with the edge of his knife, and there it was, an internal chip, still blinking red. Barely alive but still tracking. He stood up fast, heart thudding. Kari stepped back into the cabin and froze when she saw the collar in his hands. "You kept this active," Ray said. Not angry, just sharp, like steel in his voice. "They can trace you. They already know you're here." Kari shook her head. "I tried to break it. I thought it was dead." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know it still worked." Ray didn't yell. He didn't have time for that. He grabbed a metal clamp, locked the collar to the work table, then took out his soldering blade. The room filled with the smell of burning wires and scorched memory chips. Kari covered her mouth, eyes wide, like she was watching a piece of herself die. The red light blinked once more, then faded out forever. Ray looked out the window, toward the hills. They already saw the signal. "We have maybe a day, maybe less." Kari didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she held her daughter closer. For the next hour, Ray packed supplies rations, thermal gear, plasma rounds, signal jammers. It wasn't just about hiding now. It was about moving, surviving, escaping again. And this time, with 2 people who couldn't fight, I never asked you to help, Kari said suddenly. You could turn us in. Get a reward. Walk away, Ray. Zipped up his field pack and looked her in the eyes. I buried a daughter once, he said. I don't leave children in the cold. Kari said nothing after that, but her silence was full. Like a storm behind glass, that evening, Luma spoke. For the first time, her voice was soft, a whisper barely stronger than the wind. But Ray heard it clearly. Will they take us back? Ray knelt beside her, looked into those tired golden eyes, and shook his head. Not while I'm breathing. Luma nodded and went back to sleep, as if that answer was enough. Kari turned her face away, wiping her eyes quietly. Outside, something moved across the ridge, something tall and slow and searching. Ray turned off the heat lamps, checked the motion alarm again, and waited by the window with his rifle in his hands. The hunter had arrived, but so had the human, and he wasn't planning to lose asterisk. Ray watched the ridge for hours. The shape moved like it didn't care who saw it, tall, wide-shouldered. Its armor shined faintly under the moonlight. No attempt to hide, no rush either. It was confident, like a predator walking through familiar woods. Knowing exactly where the prey had gone, Kari sat on the floor with Luma wrapped in her arms. The girl slept through the fear, through the silence, her body still weak, but her breathing steady now. Ray knew this moment would come. The caller signal had been brief, but for the Koru, that was enough. He slid open a panel in the back wall of the cabin, revealing a narrow crawlspace, lined with tools and old supply crates. Kari looked up, confused. Ray nodded toward the dark hole. Go in, now. Take her. Don't make noise. Don't come out unless I say. Kari didn't argue. She kissed Luma's forehead, then crawled in with the girl clutched tightly to her chest. Ray pulled the panel back into place, covering it with a heavy crate. Then he turned and waited. The door didn't burst open like in old war vids. There was no explosion, no shouts. There was only a knock, not soft like Kari's had been. This one was slow and strong, like metal striking metal, followed by a voice. Deep and filtered through a mask. Cold as ice and full of certainty. We know she is here. Ray stood still, rifle pointed low, breathing slow and steady. We do not want the human, the voice said again, only the property she stole. Ray stepped closer to the door. She's not property, he said loud enough to be heard. She's a mother. And the child is not yours. A pause. Then the sound of boots crunching snow as the figure backed away. Ray exhaled, and then the roof shattered. A second Koru hunter dropped from above, slamming into the cabin like a missile. Armored boots cracking the floor, glowing spear in hand. It lunged, but Ray had already moved. He rolled across the floor. Fired 2 plasma shots into the creature's chest. One hit the armor and sparked off. The other caught the side of the neck, burning through flesh. The hunter roared and swung the spear wide, slicing through the air where Ray had been a second before. Ray grabbed a wrench and slammed it against the hunter's helmet, then fired again, this time hitting the eye port. The creature staggered. Ray kicked it back toward the wall, then dove for his emergency detonator. You brought war to my home, he muttered. He pressed the switch outside. Buried mines exploded near the ridge, shaking the ground. The hunter at the door was caught in the blast, torn apart by the force. Pieces of black armor flew into the night air like broken bones. Inside, the second hunter crashed to the ground. Still moving, but slower now, Ray stood over it, rifle aimed at the exposed neck joint. Tell your masters, Ray said coldly. If they come for her again, they better bring an army. The hunter growled once more, then stopped breathing. Ray stepped back, breathing hard, blood dripping down his arm from a cut he hadn't noticed. He didn't care. He walked to the panel, moved the crate, and opened it. Kari crawled out slowly, eyes wide, holding Luma close. Ray knelt beside them, whispering, They found us. But they didn't win. Kari touched his shoulder, not with fear but something else, something close to trust, something that might, one day, become hope. But Ray knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The snow around the cabin was stained black with smoke and burned metal. Ray stood over the wreckage, staring at the broken armor scattered across the ground. The wind had returned, blowing dust over the bodies of the Koru hunters, as if trying to erase the fight from memory. Kari didn't speak. She just wrapped Luma tighter in her coat, her eyes locked on the horizon. She knew more would come. She didn't need to say it, and Ray already knew. They had less than a day, maybe less than half. And staying meant death. Ray moved quickly, packing supplies, compressed food, thermal grenades, water units. One emergency medkit. He grabbed what little ammo he had left and loaded every cell into his belt. His movements were sharp, practiced, his face unreadable, but his mind was racing. He had lived alone for too long, stayed hidden from the galaxy, avoided wars, people, lies, but now he was walking back into it, not for himself, but for them. Kari helped without being told. She handed him gear, cleaned the rifle without asking, found a working energy core in the dead hunter's chest plate. Ray noticed her hands didn't shake anymore, not like before. She wasn't just scared now, she was ready. At dusk, they left the cabin. Ray locked the door behind him, not because he thought they'd return, but because leaving it open felt like surrender. They moved fast through the canyon trails. Ray led the way. Kari carried Luma, and behind them, the sky grew darker with clouds, and something colder than snow filled the air. Ray checked the tracker he had clipped to his wrist. "There's an old mining station up the slope," he said, "abandoned, maybe 15 kilometers north." Kari didn't ask why there. She simply nodded. The climb was slow, and Luma coughed. Once, then twice, a sharp sound in the silence. Kari kissed her forehead, whispering words in a tongue Ray didn't understand, but he didn't need to. He understood the meaning. Halfway up the ridge, Kari stumbled, her foot caught on loose stone. Ray turned and caught her before she could fall, his hand wrapped around her arm, steady and warm. She looked up at him, breathless. "You should leave us. Take a different path. Survive." Ray didn't even blink. "I told you. I don't leave children in the cold." They kept walking, step by step, until the stars came out, sharp and white above the frozen peaks. By midnight, they reached the edge of the mining station. Broken towers and metal pipes poking out of the ice like bones. Ray found a door buried under snow and forced it open with a rusted lever. Inside was darkness, stale air, silence, perfect for hiding. Ray secured the area, set up a heat source, laid blankets on the floor. Kari finally let her muscles relax, just enough to sleep with her daughter in her arms. Ray stood watch, rifle on his lap, staring out through a crack in the steel wall at the stars above. He didn't know what was waiting beyond the next ridge. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was a promise, one he would not break. The mining station groaned in the wind, old metal protesting against years of silence, now broken by life again. Ray walked through the dark halls with a glow rod in one hand and his rifle in the other. Every corner echoed with the sound of snow shifting. Above the roof, like distant footsteps no one could see, Kari sat near the heater with Luma curled up against her. The girl had barely spoken since they left the cabin, but she watched everything, her eyes wide and alert, as if trying to memorize every second. In case it was her last, Ray found an old terminal deep inside the station, covered in dust and rust. The power core was dead, but he had salvaged a battery from one of the fallen hunters. He plugged it in and waited. After a few seconds, the screen flickered on. Dim and cracked, but working. Logs scrolled across the screen: last known cargo, exit routes, transmission codes. Then something else, something Ray hadn't expected. A locked message marked urgent, dated only 4 days ago. He tapped it open, Unit 7 off-grid. Possible defector escaped with Gen-class specimen, bounty authorized, termination orders active, Ray. Leaned back slowly, the words burned into his mind. They hadn't just been chasing Kari because she ran away. They were hunting Luma. He returned to the heater slowly. Kari looked up at him, and before he could speak, she said quietly, "You know now?" Ray nodded. "What is she?" Kari held Luma tighter. Not what, who. Her father was a Koru noble. Her blood is different, clean, rare, powerful. They called her a genetic treasure. They wanted to turn her into a lab tool. Not a person. Ray sat down slowly, firelight flickering in his tired eyes. "And you?" he asked. "You're not her mother?" Kari shook her head. "No. I was her guard, her caretaker, her prisoner." She paused, but she started calling me mother. And I couldn't correct her. Ray stared at the child, now sleeping. With her hand resting on Kari's chest, he had fought in wars, lost friends, bled for causes he barely understood. But this was something he understood perfectly. A child being hunted for what was inside her, a woman who had risked death to protect her, and a decision he had already made even before the question reached his lips. "We're not running anymore," he said. Kari blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Ray stood, checking his gear. "They want her so bad they can come and try again." He loaded the plasma rifle with the last energy cell. "But this time, we'll be ready." Kari slowly rose to her feet. Her face unreadable, but her eyes full of something new. Fire. Not fear, not desperation, but purpose. She stepped closer to Ray. Her voice steady. "If we don't survive, you need to make sure Luma does." Ray looked her in the eye. "We're all walking out of this, or none of." USR from far below the station. In the valley's shadows, a single red light blinked once. The Koru had found them again, but this time, the human wasn't alone, and he wasn't running. The station lights flickered once, then died completely. Silence swallowed the walls. Even the wind outside had gone still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ray stood near the entrance tunnel, cloak wrapped tight, rifle ready. Thermal charges wired along the narrow metal path. Kari was behind him, carrying Luma close to her chest. She had painted a strip of ash across her face, a forgotten tradition. From her homeworld meant to honor the dead or prepare for death, neither of them said goodbye. Because neither of them believed it would end that way, the first sound was a hum, deep and electric, vibrating through the steel under their feet. Then came the heavy footsteps, 5 this time, maybe 6. Armored shapes moving in tight formation through the snow, eyes glowing like furnaces, scanners sweeping through every crack in the rock. They entered the tunnel like machines, without fear, without pause. Ray waited until they passed the first marker. Then pressed the detonator. A wall of fire exploded down the corridor, turning steel into slag. 2 hunters went down instantly, their armor glowing red with heat before they dropped. But the others pushed forward, fast, aggressive. Ray opened fire. Shots ripped through the smoke. One hunter stumbled back, sparks flying from his chest. Another ducked and rolled, flanking right, but Ray moved with brutal calm, years of soldier instinct guiding every motion. He hit one in the knee, then the throat. And when his rifle ran dry, he drew his knife. They fought hand to hand, blades scraping metal, fists shattering bone. One hunter slammed Ray into the wall, cracking the panel. Ray headbutted him, then drove the knife into his neck joint. Again and again, until the body stopped twitching. Blood smeared his face. His side burned from a deep cut. But he kept going. Behind him, Kari stood over the last intruder. smoke rising from the short-range blaster she had hidden in her coat, her hands shaking. Her breath heavy but her aim perfect. Ray stumbled but didn't fall. Kari rushed to him, Luma still wrapped in her arms. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "Ray?" Looked down, blood soaked his shirt, dark and spreading. His knees hit the floor before he could speak. Kari cried out, lowering him gently to the ground. "No, no, no. Stay with me." He tried to talk, coughed, then finally managed a few words. "You're safe now." Kari held his face in her hands, shaking her head. "Don't say that." "You're not done yet." "Not yet." Luma crawled forward, her tiny hand touching Ray's chest. Her skin glowed faintly, just for a second, like sunlight trapped in glass. And then the bleeding slowed. Ray's eyes blinked open, weak but alive. Kari stared at her, breathless. "What did you just do?" Luma looked at her with sleepy eyes. "I helped," she whispered. Ray coughed a laugh. "Remind me to teach her how to shoot next." They stayed there for a long time, wrapped in silence and smoke, surrounded by bodies and broken metal. Ray didn't know what would come next. Maybe more hunters. Maybe a future they'd have to build from the ashes. But for now, Kari was safe. Luma was safe, and the cabin in the wasteland was no longer just a hiding place. It had become something else. A home made not by blood, but by choice, and the unbreakable promise of a human who refused to look away.